listening to the Traditional Outdoors Podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on the Traditional Outdoors Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Steve Angel, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nick View. And we're going to pick up where we left off on the last episode where we were talking about public land. Nick kind of closed us out on a bit of a humorous turkey hunting story where he sent some poor young man running for cover because he had encountered a Yeti with a shotgun. So if you missed that, be sure to go back and listen. But we're just going to kind of pick up where we left off. We had a few more topics that we wanted to cover. So with that, first of all, how's it going, Nick?
Oh, it's going good. It's going better. Good week, and yeah, I can't wait to get back into this. It's a topic that you just really can't, talk enough about. It's such a cornerstone for everything you can do in the outdoors that I think we could talk about public land every episode, never actually talk about all of it.
And I'm sure we probably will talk about it quite a bit. This is definitely not the final time we will be discussing something about public land. So I guess so far you're managing to forget what you said your daughter called it, but you've managed to escape the influenza so far.
Yeah, I have, but I'm pretty paranoid.
I don't blame you. My wife gives me a hard time because once I know that people are starting to get sick, I'm just religious about the hand sanitizer thing and just reek of the alcohol odor every time I get a chance. I'm washing my hands, and especially if someone in the house gets sick, I become obsessed over it.
Well, I disinfected my keyboard today. I never do that.
Well, I'm the only one that types on my keyboard, so unless I'm going to infect myself, I guess I'm pretty safe there.
Well, me too, but I'm gross. So anyway.
So I guess let's just go ahead and jump in and get started. I do want to continue where we left off, and I know we were talking about, and I really hated to end an episode on a negative, but we kind of went off on some tangents and things went a little long. But at least we managed for you to end on a humorous story that could have been a negative slant. But we were talking about some of the negatives, or maybe the perceived negatives of hunting public land, and we had a couple of stories. We talked a little bit about people littering and good stewardship and not taking care of the public lands. And I was thinking after that episode, and one of the things that I did want to spend just a brief amount of time talking about with regards to that is, each of us that's using public land, we have a responsibility that if we see that kind of activity, if we see somebody doing it, and I'm not talking about getting in a confrontation, but it never hurts to walk up to someone and just say, this is my land too, and I'd appreciate it if you cleaned up behind yourself, or remove that marking tape when you're done. But also, you were talking the last time, I think at the very beginning, about you had already started scouting for this fall, and you took your girls out with you, which is great. I think anytime you can get kids out there, it's a good thing. But one thing that I used to do, and it's kind of funny, my daughter Bella, she's only been hunting with me a couple of times, and there's various reasons for that. No reason to get into it. She wants to go more, but she's so dedicated to her education right now that she just really doesn't have time. But I digress. But when I started taking her fishing years ago, one of the things that I always made sure we packed was a garbage bag, not a big garbage bag, just a garbage bag. And we would go and we would spend a day fishing, and we would spend the last 20 minutes or so, not a long time, but enough time to, kind of make an impact on her mentally. But we would spend 15 to 20 minutes just, walking the stream, picking up trash, maybe along the access road, those kind of things. And we did that every time. And for a while there, we went out fishing quite a few times, or quite often, I should say. And I guess we'd been doing that for a year or two, and I got in a hurry one day. We were leaving, And she literally stopped me at the door and said, "Dad, you're forgetting something." And what am I forgetting? And she said, "You didn't get a trash bag." So that told me, how much kids are paying attention and how much they learn and they follow in our footsteps. And to her, that was as much a part of us going out and spending time in the outdoors as the fun was. She saw that as a responsibility, and that's a great thing. And it took very little to instill that into her.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me what kids really pick up and what ends up being important to them that you don't think is gonna be. Just the little things. My kids are the same way. Aubrey and Mackenzie, when they go out in the woods, if they see any trash, they're like appalled by it, and they go pick it up and put it in their pocket. But with other things too, like Aubrey will, in particular, Aubrey has what she calls her spring collection. And it's something she learned in preschool. They would take them out in the woods nearby and they do little walks and stuff like that. And so she still has the spring collection. But what it is that whenever Aubrey ever goes anywhere, if she finds anything interesting in the woods, she'll take it back with her, and she'll put it in a box under her bed. So I never knew what the spring collection was until I found it one day. And it was pretty much pungent potpourri by that time. Lord knows what was in there, but feathers and leaves and pine cones and weeds and nests, bird nests like she'd find on the ground, or acorns or rocks. There was so much in there. But that was really, that's what she was, revved up about. That's what she wanted to do. She loved to find that stuff. And still to this day, whenever I go to visit you or anything, I always try to find quartz, or I found a turtle shell for her one time, a box turtle shell, brought that home for her and kind of painted that up a little bit. And she really gets a kick out of that stuff. And Mackenzie, she's always looking for stuff she could do with crafts. So she, if it's a rock she can paint, or anything you can glue on a piece of construction paper or tape it, she's all about it. So she really gets into that. But yeah, that really wasn't learned. That's just something they love to do. And recently, what I started doing is Aubrey gets bored really easy. So when we went, I've done this a couple times now where I've handed her, I always take my camera with me, my SLR, and I always hand it to her. And I just say, I usually have my bow and I'm stumping or something. And the girls call it hunting when they come with me anyway. They think I'm hunting, which I always have to tell them, little side tangent. Don't tell people that daddy's hunting, especially when it's not deer season, or daddy's going to get a call about poaching.
The man in the green suit will show up at your door.
Yeah, exactly. So what I started doing was I started handing Aubrey my camera, and she's a good little photographer. She just takes pictures. Like, she'll take pictures of me shooting. She'll take pictures of her sister. She'll have her sister take pictures of her. And they didn't complain one time. We were in the woods. We probably walked 1.5 miles, there and then back. They never complained once. That's a first. When they were a little bit smaller and their legs were smaller, they had a real hard time, especially Mackenzie. But now that they're getting a little bit taller and they can handle some of the terrain, other than getting poked and, or slapped in the face with a stick, which, you were talking about that lesson with Bella with the trash. Well, we're learning all kinds of things about being out in the woods. And, one of them is, you hold sticks for the person behind you, rather than Aubrey.
I know some adults that could learn.
Yeah,
learn an education there.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I had never really thought about it before, but as soon as we got into the woods, Aubrey moved this stick out of her face, and it just swung back and just smacked Mackenzie in the teeth. And she just was bawling, and I was just like, what? Because she hit me with a stick. I'm like, she didn't hit you with the stick. The stick hit you in the face. But Aubrey, you're supposed to hold the stick for the person in front of you. And we had to repeat this over and over again the entire trip. And I kept thinking, man, that's just something you just kind of over time, like it's a courtesy you do for other people in the woods. Like if you're walking and you hold a big branch, you don't just let the thing swing back and hit somebody in the face. But kids don't know any better, you know.
Well, you're doing better than I am, because I have to admit I've tried carrying Bella out with me twice scouting, and both times have ended in sheer disaster. In fact, one of them, she jokes about it now, but I still think it really bothers her a little bit. But the first time I carried her out, it was late summer, and we arrived at the WMA, and I thought I was going to be able to drive most of the way in, but the gate was closed, so we had to walk. And we're walking down this gravel road, and I can't even remember how old she was. She wasn't very old at the time, maybe 6 or 7. And she sees a grasshopper, and she decides she wants to catch this grasshopper. So I'm literally helping her in what is to become one of the the biggest traumatic events of her life. I tell her, well, I'm going to circle around and I'll get his attention, and then you try to grab it, right? I mean, makes sense. So I circle around this, and this grasshopper was huge. I mean, it was like 3 inches long, and it's watching me, right? So it's turning, and I said, all right, Bella, grab it. Well, bless her heart, she went to grab this thing, and the gravel rolled under her feet as she lunged for this grasshopper. And I mean, she hit the ground hard. She hit the ground so hard it was like a puff of dust came out, and I felt like the biggest heel, right? And pick her up and dust her off and get her to, finally get her to stop crying, because it hurt. And she's probably going to be mad at me when she finds out I'm telling this story, but it was a big deal, and still is. Like I said, we kind of joke about it a little bit now. And then the second time I carry her out, and I'm actually going to check a couple of trail cameras. And she's walking literally right behind me, and for some unknown reason, we're a mile away from my truck at this point, but we were walking on a road. We didn't step off the road and into the woods 20 yards, and I hear her. She didn't cry out, she didn't scream, but she said, ow, and you knew something was wrong. You could just tell that when you're with your kids, something's wrong here. And I turned around, and she's looking and pointing at her foot, and there's this red wasp that had to be 1.5 inches long, and this thing is just drilling her, and it's going around in circles trying to get the stinger in just deeper. And I whirled around and knocked this thing off. Well, Bella had lots of allergies growing up, so the first thing that goes in my mind is, oh crap, I've got to get to the truck in case she has an allergy. I had Benadryl in the truck, but I didn't have anything with me in case she has a reaction. So I scoop her up and literally run as fast as I can go all the way back to the truck. And she was probably, I don't know, 8 years old at the time, I guess. She didn't have a reaction. We got her to the truck. We start driving home, and she knows that I'm freaking out, right? So she's sitting there reassuring me, Dad, I'm okay. And her foot, her friend where she got stung swelled up a little bit, but to this day she still has a scar on her foot from that wasp sting. So, wow. Yeah, I mean, you're doing much better than I am at this point. So
I don't know.
Whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Well, okay, so we both have girls. I got to share this before we move on. So, of course, what accommodates spending a lot of time in the woods is learning how to go to the bathroom in the woods. And yes, there are still people I know who don't do it right. but so we get about 1.5 miles back, and we're in that spot that I want to check out on the topo, and we're back there, and we're kind of on the edge of this big bowl, and there's nobody around, and Aubrey's, of course, she slammed a whole juice or whatever before we went out there, and she's like, I got to go to the bathroom, Dad. And I'm like, can you wait? And she's like, no, it's going to take a long time to walk. I can't wait. And she's like, what do I do? I'm like, go. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you take your pants off and you'd go. And we did that all the time growing up. Hell, we lived in the woods, and I mean, of course, 3 boys, we don't have a problem going. It's just a lot easier than for us, In fact, we preferred to pee outside. Sometimes we just go outside to pee anyway because somebody was always in the bathroom. So the girls, that's just appalling. So I'm like, I'm going to have to teach this kid how to go to the bathroom in the woods. And, of course, Mackenzie's just watching intently because she's just like, I can't believe that Sissy's going to go to the bathroom in the woods. This is crazy. And she's just, her eyes are just bugged out of her head. So, I mean, Aubrey's a ham. So, I go, you're going to have to go do it, Aubrey. And so I'm like, I'm not going to look. And I'm going to turn Kenzie around too. And you got to go over there, take your pants off, squat down, and go. Go over by that stump so nobody else sees you. So she walks over by this deadfall, and this stump, this big old stump, is bigger than she was, and I hear all of a sudden, she drops trowel, and I turn around, and all of a sudden I hear giggling, and I'm like, all right. I turn around, I said, what are you doing? And I see she's just white butt sticking way out. She's not squatting. She leaned over. Pants are down around her ankles. She's peeing into her pants, which are down around her ankles, in a steady flow. And I'm just like, oh no, stop. I can't stop. You need to stop. I'm like, no, squat down. Like I'm trying to tell her, I'm like, you need to squat down. I'm like, you're peeing into your pants. And she just looked out and she goes, oh. And then she squats down and she finishes. I'm like, and she barely had any left. And I just go, she goes, hey, you got a wipe? And I'm like, no, I don't have a wipe. You're going to have to deal with it. So she has these pee pants. So she's got, her pants were soaked and we had to walk 1.5 miles back. So, she was,
wow, that's quality family entertainment right there. You can't.
Well, kids forget so damn fast. We got home and she's like, she immediately went and got her tablet. She starts playing on it. I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, she's like, what? I'm like, you're sitting in pee pants. You need to go take care of that. And she's like, oh yeah. And she went, I'm like, this is funny. I'm like, I don't know. So Mackenzie, when we were out there, she goes, I got to go too, Dad, because she was all gung-ho about it, right? And I'm like, no, you're not. It would be a catastrophe. You're going to have to hold it.
So here's the question. Does Jess know about all this?
Oh, she knew about it. I was actually going to take a picture. Because I thought it was that funny, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to embarrass this kid. And plus, you said, I didn't feel right about it, but yeah, I told her all about it. She was just hysterical. I mean, but it's the first time that we've ever had to do that. Usually when I was younger, and they were first, they were young, really, really young. I think the first time I took Mackenzie out, she was 2.5 maybe, and Aubrey, when she was 2, and then she would have been 4. I used to take Aubrey out, the two of us, all the time when she was real little, but I always end up having to carry him back. So I didn't go very far, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time out there. I don't even think I brought my bow every once in a while back then, but I never had to worry about it. Now I've got to I feel like a fool because I didn't plan it. Like if I'm gonna take him, I got to make sure I have a dad bag packed with like stuff in it for a little girl, But my dad never checked on any of that. Like he was just like, we're going to the woods, You need anything, bring it.
Well, it is. It's definitely different with girls than it is with boys. I grew up with a brother. I don't have, and I know you've got brothers too, but. When I had my first child, a daughter, I was in completely new territory, and now obviously I keep telling everybody I'm being punished for my teenage years because I've got all daughters, so I've got 3 daughters, but yeah, that's very cool. That's a cool story.
Oh yeah, man, I'm in trouble. You can't even do a round of 3Ds with little girls without having a backpack with with like wet naps and a juice box and graham crackers and a shirt and an extra pair of pants and socks and I mean it's like you never know what's going to happen.
I know how much trouble you're in because Lori and I talk about it all the time with the stuff that gets posted on Facebook as far as the kids. We know you're in big trouble.
Yeah, I am. They're worse than me. But anyway, I know we got off on a tangent, but I think it was worthwhile. But yeah, man, there's nothing better than bringing your kid into the woods. I'm just happy that they want to go. You know, and I've been looking for other reasons to get them out there, you know, thinking about maybe getting back into fishing. You know, my dad always took us fishing, and we got a lot of places you can fish around here, and I think the kids would really enjoy it. Their grandfather took them a couple times, and, you know, they were kind of freaked out by the fish, but, you know, I think that they'd like it. Or, you know, whether we do that or berry picking, you know, they like to pick berries. Jess really likes to do that. I want to find some blackberry places around here. And, you know, maybe morels, you know, I don't know, but I mean, if you can make it fun, you can turn it into a scavenger hunt or hopefully we're getting to the point now where they get real lazy with their bows. I'd like to take them in the woods and stump shoot, but their arrows really don't stick, and they don't really like to carry their stuff, and I end up carrying it. They'd rather just take pictures or do a scavenger hunt kind of thing, and that's fine with me. As long as they want to be out in the woods with me, I'm good for it, and I hope at least one of them wants to continue to do that as they're older, and hopefully one of them wants to hunt or something.
So. Well, anything they're doing outside is going to be better than watching TV or playing a video game. So, you know, yeah, by all means, keep them out there.
Mm-hmm.
But we did kind of get off on a tangent there, but I do think it is important. And, you know, that's one thing that I hope we continue to focus on and work into this is the importance of bringing up kids right as far as getting them outdoors and teaching them the things that we've learned.
Yeah. Don't be too busy doing what you're doing to not let them be a part of it, because at some point they're not going to be there. And
absolutely.
I mean, and I, you know, I totally, because I've caught myself, I don't know how many times, and this is totally a worthwhile discussion, where I've said, you know, man, what a pain. You know, I can't do this, I can't do that, and you know, I was talking. I know we're throwing friends out all over the place, but I was talking to one of my MLA friends, Floyd Wells, Bub, and he was telling me about his daughter who's my age, and he's like, man, when I was younger, he's like, I was into this, you know, my wife wasn't, and I brought that little girl everywhere with me. She tailed, you know, everywhere I went. Where if I was going to a 3D shoot, she was going to be there with me. If I was in the woods, she was there with me. And, you know, never regretted a minute of it. And it's same, you know, I gotta catch myself where I'm like getting irritated, like, you know what, this isn't gonna last forever. And you want them to, if they have grandkids someday, or if they have your grandkids someday and they have the kids of their own and whatnot, you know, you want them to appreciate the outdoors too. You know, you got to plant the seed now, or it's not going to happen.
Well, and that's a lot of the reason I think we're having declining numbers is it's a trickle down effect when you start, you know, if you don't keep your kids involved, then there's almost no chance that they're going to want to pass that along to their kids. So again, yeah, I definitely think that's important. But let's try to get this train back on the rails a little bit, I guess.
Sure.
And if we back up. Talking about the other hunters we've had experiences we've run into in the woods, and sounds like most of your experiences have been pretty good. But have you ever thought about potentially using other hunters or other people, like you was talking about the cyclists and so forth? Have you ever thought about using them as a hunting tool?
It's happened by accident before. I mean, I've had people tell me, I used to think my hunt was ruined if I saw anybody in the woods. And a lot of times, it might even have been you that's always said, you know, watch the back trail. Like, you know, they might kick something out. You know, some people say that they love to be in the woods at a random time, like, you know, 11, 12 o'clock, and hunt till 4 or 5 or till the rest of the day, because that's when people are getting in and out of the woods and the deer are getting kicked out of their beds and spooked. And that's kind of what's happened to me before. I remember a couple Novembers ago, we had a real bad snow. And we had like, a foot and a half of snow on the ground. And I went out in the woods and got all settled. And I was on a real nice funnel on the top of a it was actually more of a finger on top of a ridge. And it was a nice little, it was coming off a clear cut. And I was set up in the bushes, and slightly uphill. And I was all set. And, of course, about a half an hour before dark, a guy came walking in, younger kid, and, he was taking the long way into where he was going, and I happened to have been there, and, he had actually tracked through a bedding area that I knew of, and I was kind of hunting off the edge of. And I just thought, okay, it's over now. I'm like, nothing's going to happen. And it had been a really quiet night. I hadn't seen anything, but I'm like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? I'm going to wait this out till dark. And I did. And sure enough, not in like 20, 30 minutes later, right at dark, I had 5 or 6 does come out the opposite direction from where he came. He had pushed them. And they worked the wind and came right around, and I ended up getting a shot at one of them. And I don't think that would have happened had he not done that. They probably would have either they wouldn't have gone that way. It's hard to explain, when you're talking on a podcast, without being able to visually show anybody. But they worked the other side of the ridge. They walked all the way around. They used another track from their bedding area, and they came right in, and yeah, that would not have happened. And that's one instance in particular that specifically I can name that another hunter caused an opportunity for me. So what about you, Steve?
So yeah, I've had one really sticks out to me where something very similar has happened for me. It was actually the only time I've actually taken a shot at a black bear with a traditional gear. I had set up, was in a stand on the kind of the leeward side of a ridge, and there was we keep coming back to these logging roads. You really give me a hard time about this.
We're gonna have to explain these logging roads at some point.
Yeah, at some point. I'm sure I'll keep bringing them up because I tend to spend a lot of times hunting around them. But there was I heard footsteps and got to looking. It was 2 hunters, and they were walking up this old logging road, which was going to bring them literally just right behind me. And they saw me and motioned me, and I could tell they motioned that they were sorry, and they kept going the direction they were going, and I listened to them. Their footsteps fade away, and I thought, well, it's still early in the afternoon. Maybe something will still come by. So I kept sitting there. And it wasn't 5 minutes after their footsteps had just faded out to where I couldn't hear them anymore. I heard footsteps again, and my first thought was, if those guys are coming back now I'm going to be a little bit upset. And I eased and turned around and looked, and obviously they had, as they were walking around this hill, this small mountain that I was hunting on, a black bear had obviously not liked them too much and came across the top of the hill and was working its way down towards me. And I probably should have, I did get a shot off, but long story short, I couldn't. The only way I could shoot behind me was to actually get down on my knees on the platform of my stand. And even then it was pitching the wrong way, so I couldn't bend at the waist to shoot. So I had to, I adjusted my elevation using my bow hand, and it just caused me to shoot really low. I shot right up under it, and it took that bear about 2 seconds to clear into the next county. I've never seen an animal move that fast, I don't think. But the difference is that I will throw out is that sometimes, and I could go into a couple of situations, but that I've actually used other hunters to my advantage. More so by knowing areas that I know that a hunter's using, and deer pattern hunters, you hear and read that all the time. And with a little bit of effort and really just paying attention, sometimes you can do the same thing. And that McGraw Ford WMA that you hunted with me, several years ago, I've hunted that a lot for a long time, and I knew where there were two ladder stands that. There were two gentlemen that hunted it, and every weekend they were there at before daylight every Saturday and every Sunday without fail. Didn't matter what the wind was doing. They were going. That was the only two stands I guess they owned because they were going to be in those stands. And I actually started doing just a little bit of searching and actually found a trail that appeared to be being used very heavily, that the deer were actually circling these two stands by working through the edge of some pines. And like you said, it's hard to explain this, but you'll know where I'm talking about because it was the same little section of pines where we had that hog just about run over us that morning right at daylight. But the deer were actually coming across a power line, and they would hook into these pines that actually came down and formed a point of a triangle, and then they would come down and cross the highway. And these two hunters could sit there all day, every day, and the deer were walking right by them within 70, 80 yards, but they couldn't see them. It took me a few times. I got busted a couple of times, but I actually set up inside of those pines down closer to the point where I knew if the animal was going to be avoiding these hunters, and if they stayed in these woods to the last minute before they had to cross the road, they had to come down to this pinch point. And it worked perfectly. And I even set up cameras there on one of those trails, and you could literally leave that camera running, and the only time you would see animals using the edge of those woods like that would be on the weekend 90% of the time. It was really kind of, they had patterned those two hunters. So, you can do things like that. It doesn't happen very often, but, I would just say make a mental note if you're out scouting and you run across a stand and somebody's hunting the area. Think about if you were a whitetail, if you were a deer, what would you do to avoid that hunter? And a lot of times it can definitely pay off. Yeah,
and on that note, that wouldn't be the first time that somebody sent a bear at you, would it?
No, it wouldn't be the first time somebody sent a bear at me. I think
the second time somebody sent a bear at you was a little bit, I guess that one came in a little bit hotter.
Well, it started to, but then it stopped and mulled around for a little bit. But when it finally did decide to bolt and run by me, I could have smacked him on the butt with my bow. He went by so close. Yeah. I don't think he ever knew I was there, but he knew you was there.
Oh yeah, folks, we're going to have to, this is kind of one of those stories you'd probably want to tell with maybe Tom on the podcast or something one of these days. But one of the first times I hunted with Steve, I had my first black bear encounter, and wasn't really hunting bears. It wasn't really planned. But one came in and to make a long story short, and I'll tell the details later, but he winded me after I watched him for a little while and went ballistic, and Steve was hunting up the ridge behind me, and the bear ran right at him towards him on that ridge, and almost simultaneously after it happened, by the time I'd gathered myself, and this bear was woofing and making a scene, and he was just barreling down towards Steve. I was shaking at the time, and by the time I got a text off to Steve that there's a bear, he was just texting me that there was a bear, and it almost ran him over, and he could have smacked it, and it was something. But it's funny that I totally caused that.
Yeah, we were only about 60 yards apart, I guess. We were pretty close to each other.
Oh, and I thought he was gonna maul you or something. Yeah, I was
and that was the same morning that Tom had the challenge with the climbing sticks. But like you said, that's probably that whole morning is probably just a good story in itself.
Oh, that's a hell of a public
time.
land story. That's a trip. That's probably my favorite public land story I have. I wrote about that one. That one's actually going to be in the book. It's called Georgia Boo Boo. That's a good one. That's actually one of my favorites. But also, Steve, I had a question for you. You were talking about how to use hunters to your advantage on public land. But what about using public land to your advantage against other hunters? Going places they're not willing to go, using natural obstacles like creeks and stuff. You've kind of always impressed me with your ability to kind of find places that people don't go. And I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a really good tip for people who hunt in a populated area and might want to get away from people.
It's a very good point, and it is something that I look for when I'm scouting. And it's kind of funny. I would love to be able to do some kind of analysis and actually collect data, but I'm a firm believer that if it's a body of water that would go over the top of a pair of boots, just over the top of the boots, you're probably going to eliminate 20% of public land hunters. If it's water that goes, up to beyond your ankles, I would say you're going to knock off another 10 to 15%. If it's up to your knees, 50% you just left behind. And if it's anything over that, you're probably going to be by yourself. And, I've done some pretty crazy things. In fact, I've probably done some things that I really shouldn't have, like wading across rivers, wading across a river in late November when it was, temperatures hovering below the freezing mark in a set of waders in pitch black dark, to get away from the masses. A couple of years ago, and this is we keep talking about McGraw Ford, but like I said, I've hunted that a lot. And one of the areas that I really like to hunt on McGraw Ford, you have to cross a fairly decent creek. It's probably, it's probably 10 yards wide. And in most of the year, you can actually cross it just with standard rubber hunting boots, 16-inch hunting boots like most people wear. But where we typically cross, it's 50 yards or less from where it runs into the Etowah River, which is a pretty decent sized river. So if the river rises from rain, it backs up in this little creek, and it can get pretty deep. And I've actually had to wear chest waders before multiple times to cross this creek because the water was so high. And 95% of the time, unless Brandon's with me, because Brandon's actually crossed it with me several times, you're talking about a 700-800 acre tract of land that we've just got completely to ourselves. And we actually can tell a difference in the amount of deer activity during those situations, because even the deer have gotten used to it. If the water's high, if it's wet and rainy, they're just not going to have the people coming across. Mm-hmm. But a couple of years ago, I actually got myself in a bad situation there because I've got a couple of funny stories about that creek. But I actually went in early one morning, pitch black dark. It had been raining. It had been wet the whole summer, and I think this was the first time I was actually crossing it. And I got about halfway across and stepped off into some sediment, and it scared me a little bit because I sunk pretty quick. It just about went over the top of my waders, and I had a really hard time freeing myself from the muck just because of the suction it created. And then there's another story about that creek. I showed up, so I started hunting that WMA, I don't know, probably 10 years or more ago. And at the time, I had been working a lot of hours, and I really hadn't gotten to hunt much that year. And I came up one weekend. I had a free weekend to hunt, and I just grabbed my stuff and I headed up there one morning. And it was, I want to say it was either really late November or early December, and it was cold. It was, for us, I say cold. It definitely wasn't Michigan cold, but for Georgia it was cold. I would say it was in the mid-20s. And I get there and I park, and again, this was where we had to park at the road at the time, and you had to walk, 3/4 of a mile to get down to the creek. And I get all the way down there and didn't have my waders. I had my hip boots on, and I could hear the river raging, and it just hit me that it had been really raining a lot, and it was raining hard, or had been raining hard, and the river was swollen, the creek was backed up, and I'm sitting there going, well, I can either choose to hunt this, or I can choose to hunt somewhere I really don't want to, or I can go back home. And I thought about it a little bit, and shortly after that, I basically stripped down to my underwear and put my boots and my pants over my shoulder, and I went across that stream, and it was just below my boxers. I mean, it was up, above my knees.
Ugh.
And yeah, it was cold. Got out on the other side, dried myself off with my wool pants, and by the time I actually walked to where I was going to hunt, I was fine. Didn't see a thing the entire day, and it hit me about 3 o'clock in the afternoon that I was going to have to repeat that process to get back to my truck. So it doesn't always pay off, but it pays off enough that anything that you can find that's an obstacle for other hunters, you stand a good chance of putting some distance between you and other people.
Yeah, I mean, and you hear about people taking, canoes to islands, stuff like that. I mean, there's something to be said about that. I mean, there's places that sometimes people just don't want to climb a steep hill, or they're thinking about the drag out, and they want to make that as easy as possible. So they don't go places with thick brush, or it's in Michigan. That's pretty common. People are pretty lazy about that stuff. But
well, and we have to be honest too. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are just a lot of woodsmanship skills are gone. They're dead, and a lot of them are they're scared they're going to get lost.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I can attest to that. Like, yeah, I mean, I go a little bit deeper every year, but I really got to push myself to do it. And the other thing is too, I'm sure there's other people that are like me, but I don't have a lot of opportunities where I can sit the whole day. At least I haven't. I usually have to barter with Jess about whether, okay, if you're going to hunt this Sunday, you're missing church, I want you home by dinner, or and she's usually really cool about it, but the dad in me is like, okay, I got to get home and be with my family. I can't be out here all day, and Jess needs some time to herself too, and we got to get the kids ready to go for the week and all that. So I got a lot of dad guilt, and I just don't stay in the woods that long. So sometimes I only get a morning sit or an evening sit, and might only sit in the morning on Saturday. I might only sit in the evening on Sunday, or unless I take the day off work during the week. But if I'm going to do something like that, I kind of have to set it up where, I might have to set up some kind of an ambush point or something where I'm not that far from the truck, or I'm somewhere I know I'm going to get out easy, or I'm somewhere I know I'm not going to get lost. Just because if it turns into an all-day event, that's going to be a huge inconvenience for my family. And there's probably a lot of people that are like that, that you can take advantage of, that aren't going to do little things, like go that extra mile or cross that creek or.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, it's so, well, there's a couple of things there I'll touch on. So obviously, mileage is a good thing. I mean, if you can get, I use the term, if you get out of key lock range. So you know how far your remote will lock the doors on your vehicle, or you can sound the horn. I think a lot of people that's an indication that they're too far from the truck. So But going in deep is definitely a good way to do it. And I will say this with regards to, I may only be able to hunt a half a day. Here's the one thing I would tell you is just my piece of advice. If you're looking to be successful, and not just be a bow hiker or you're just looking to watch nature. If you want to be successful, then I would rather spend 2 hours hunting in an area that I felt a high amount of confidence in than 4 hours in an area just because I didn't want to spend the extra hour on each end getting in and out. Mm-hmm. So, even if it's a day that I can only hunt till, 10 or 11 o'clock, I typically don't change anything. I'll still put in, I'll go that. And it's not always getting in deep. That's not necessarily always the case. But I have found that, once you get a half mile, especially in archery season, once you get a half mile here in Georgia from where you have to park, chances of you running into anybody went way down. And if you go a mile in, you're not going to see anybody unless they're lost. That's kind of what I've found. Now, here's one thing I will challenge you with, though, to think about between now and this fall. When you're talking about those areas that you've only got a short window of time to hunt, so you need something that is accessible, it's not always about an obstacle or how far away you can get from the truck or from everybody else. Sometimes you have to look for the spot that's just too obvious. And I'll give you one example of that. One of the most productive areas that I've hunted on public land, if you look at the last 15 years, one of the WMAs and it's Dawson Forest WMA, you've been on that WMA, and I don't do this anymore, so I haven't hunted this area in a year, so I really don't care about giving out this location. But there's a maintenance, wildlife management maintenance station on this WMA, right on the highway, and they keep and maintain and do service on all the vehicles and so forth that they use in maintaining all the WMAs in a certain area. I don't know exactly what the area is, but they have a lot of big trucks, a lot of tractors and so forth. And the area just behind that maintenance shed, I have seen more deer. I have harvested more deer off of that one section than any other public land. Nobody will hunt it because it's right next to the game warden. They want to avoid the game warden, which if you're not doing anything wrong, who cares? But people just they want to avoid that. And I will tell you how close. I shot a doe there a few years back, and I was hunting so close to that maintenance shed, and I didn't know the gentleman was there at the time. But when I shot that doe, after about, I don't know, 5 minutes maybe, I heard a DNR officer that was actually at that shed at the time hollered down into the woods and said, "Well, did you get it?" And he ended up actually coming out and helping me drag the animal out of the woods because it was literally so close. And, he kind of laughed and said he'd been watching my truck, and he figured somebody was hunting back there. And he said, we see deer back there and out here in the grass in front of the maintenance shed all the time, and nobody hunts it. So, look for something that may be just too good to be true or too obvious, and you may actually stumble into a really good hunting area that's actually very accessible. This was maybe a 5-minute walk from where I parked.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something to be said too about I try not to let it get I'm not going to get scared out of a good spot because somebody's been hunting there. Like if I've got a short amount of time and I'm there and I'm in the woods and I'm first or whatever, then I'm going to hunt it. That's not going to stop me. And usually if I'm going in and I got a 2-3 hour window, I'm going to hunt somewhere that I know I have the best chance of seeing something, or I'm just wasting my time. So Not necessarily looking for obstacles or things like that, but I really like that point. the obvious point. That's really kind of interesting, because I know I have passed places before that I thought were either too close to the truck or were too out in the open, or obviously hunted too much, where I just didn't hunt it for whatever reason, convinced myself not to, and then you could tell that deer had been there the next day, and I missed out on it or whatever. So yeah, I like
Sure.
that's good advice. So
Well, and all of this too is things that you can keep in mind. One of the big challenges about hunting public land, especially if you're going to hunt out of state, Tom and I have a mule deer hunt coming up this fall in Wyoming, and we're hunting public land. We're doing do-it-yourself public land, and we've already started doing some scouting through Topo Maps and through Google Earth, which is a lot cheaper than a airline ticket to go out there and do it boots on the ground. But you can use some of these type tactics for going in blind too. So obviously you want to look at Topo Maps and try to find funnels, ridges, and in some cases, and I even did this on public land in Michigan, if you know what to look for, you can actually even find game trails just looking at Google Earth. Not the easiest thing to do, but you can find it, and you can definitely see it looking at Google Earth for areas out west. So there's definitely ways that you can, without ever setting foot on a piece of property, you can really narrow down the areas that you want to hunt. And I always, definitely recommend you have more than one, just in case one doesn't pan out, like somebody puts you in the middle of a dog fence or something like that. But you can really, and with Google Earth, in some cases, the imagery has gotten so good at this point, you can almost zoom in and pick a specific tree that you feel like you can hang a stand in to hunt out of. So, all of these tools are readily available, and especially if you're looking at hunting an area that is out of state. Or maybe it's just a 4 or 5 hour drive within your state, and you're not going to have time to go and scout it, but you want to hunt it. Mm-hmm. Put those tools to use. It doesn't cost you anything. I mean, most of it, with Google Earth, and then Cal Topo is another good one. There's a lot of good free tools out there that you can do a lot of scouting just sitting at your computer.
Yeah. Totally. And, you said before that's like your favorite part of all this anyway. That's kind of what you like to do the most. You almost as much as hunting, you like to put that time in the off season. And I'm really trying to do that. And there's a couple places like, the first deer I ever got was actually on university property where I work. I work at Grand Valley State University, and the first deer I ever shot was on a doe culling program. Where you could hunt on university grounds as long as you were 100 yards away from a building. And I haven't been back since. And I was just talking to the arborist the other day, and I think I'm gonna do it this year, because you can hunt it from December 18th on to the first of the year. And I know like 22 people hunt there, and I'm always assuming that they're all hunting out there and they've all got the spots picked out. And I've kind of talked myself out of it, because I'm like, all right, well, I haven't put any time in, and I also don't want to go stomping around on property that's not mine, and whatnot. But I talked to him, and I'm like, do you mind if I go stomping around on property and check it out and, do a little bit of research and pick your brain? And he's like, no, I don't care. I want people to shoot deer out of here. So I'm going to do that this year. I'm taking advantage of it. By the time December rolls around, I want that to be my late season spot. And I mean, there's a heck of a lot less chance I'm going to get bugged out there. I mean, you have to be a university employee to be able to hunt out there, and it's bow only. So I'm looking forward to that. The other thing too is, I know I mentioned I've had short windows in the past, but I haven't really, like, most of the time if I just asked Jess and talked to her about it, I'd be fine. Like, if I told her, like, I'm going to go and I'm going to hunt all day, she'd say, fine, sure. I think it's more guilt than anything. It's not like she's telling me I can't go hunting. it's more of, I think what I would rather do than do little teeny hunts here and there, I'd rather get more targeted and get more out of my hunts, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
it does.
yeah, I mean, like whatever I can do, whatever edge I can get out of the woods and say, okay, I am going to hit it hard this weekend and I'm going to hunt all day Saturday. That would be, it's going to be more effective to do that than it's going to be for me to go out Friday night for a couple hours and then try to hit it Sunday morning for a few more. Or something.
Well, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier.
Depending on the weather.
Are you going to be a hunter, or are you going out there to watch wildlife?
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with either one of them.
There's nothing wrong with going out into the woods. Like, there's been times I've gone out into the woods where I've gone out in the woods knowing full well that there's little chance I'm going to see anything. Where I didn't put time in, or maybe the wind's not quite right, or maybe I'm, and I had to go somewhere I wasn't familiar with, or maybe, for whatever reason, maybe it's dreary and the weather's not great or something, but I want to take the time. It's deer season. I want to go be in the woods. I want to be by myself. There's plenty of times I've done that too. Trying to avoid not messing something up. That's good. Obviously I'm not going to go tramping around somewhere that's going to totally mess it up. But, and on the other hand, it's public land. Somebody could be there right after you. I mean, if I'm going to hunt one weekend and then I'm not in there a week and somebody comes in there, and you could have 4 or 5 hunters in there during that week, for all I know. One thing I'll add that I have learned though is that, and I kind of learned this more from hunting out with John at Yankee, is that, I mean, it's a hell of a lot better to get time off during the week and hunt during the week than it is to try to go out on the weekend and battle all the weekend warriors.
Sure.
I'm actually really surprised how few people hunt during the week.
Well, when we've hunted out there, we don't see hardly anybody during the week.
We don't. And it's the same when I hunt with you in Georgia too. Like, it's always better. I mean, when you and I go, like on a Thursday or a Wednesday, Friday morning, that.
Well, here we just have so much property, and
yeah,
even as little far north as I am from Atlanta, during archery season, you very rarely run into people. Now, McGraw Ford, after the regular archery season closes, the archery only WMAs, you're going to run into more people. But I typically avoid the management areas these days during the managed hunts and the gun seasons. Don't know why. Just something I've not done recently. But yeah, we I don't think we have the numbers except during the management hunts that you guys deal with.
Yeah, it's and it's not too bad. And the nice part about it is I've got. The place I live right now in Rockford, I'm not far from Rogue River game area. I'm not far from Cannonsburg game area off Egypt Valley Road. I'm not far from, it's not like this is all public knowledge, so it's not like I'm giving anything away.
Right.
It's, I'm like I said, I'm like a 30, 45 minutes from Yankee Springs. I've got plenty of land to bounce between now. And that's just getting up and investigating. There's places I'd like to go check out that I haven't checked out, and I'm kind of ashamed that I haven't. I've just been either too busy or too lazy, and I haven't really put enough time in there. Or I've been scared off because I found signs of other hunters there, and I thought, okay, well, that's too hunted. I don't want to mess it up. But my attitude's kind of changed about that too. Now I'm kind of like, well, if I put the time in and the work, and I'm in the woods before you, then I'm in the woods before you.
Yep.
And I got to get, I think I'm going to get a lot better with that. Because I'm not out there just for my health. I don't want to go out there and every time sit without a chance to see anything just because I don't want to ruin somebody else's experience. And I know that sounds really strange. It's probably going to sound strange to a lot of people, but I've always been that way, where I'm kind of like, I don't want anybody messing with me. I don't want to see people. I'm out here. I want to be in solitude. And I'm one of those people that if I wake up late or something happens, like, I'm not going to go stomping around in the woods at 10 a.m. just because, or at least I'll drive by the area, and if I see people parked there, I'm like, okay, I'm not going in at 10 o'clock. Like, I'm going to screw this up for somebody. That's just the way I am. Probably to a fault, but I don't know. It doesn't feel right to me. But anyway.
Well, one thing I do want to slide in here, because I was thinking about it as you've been talking about, doing more scouting, and you were talking about taking your kids out and taking pictures and so forth, is, when you do find those good areas, you want to try to keep those good areas secret. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I've actually seen a couple of people now made the mistake of is with taking pictures. So, if you're taking pictures and you're uploading them to, Facebook or something like that, it kind of strips that stuff off. But one thing to keep in mind, if you're taking pictures with a smartphone of areas, and, if you send those out in a text or an email or something like that, and somebody gets those, a lot of times they have unless you turn it off, there's geotagging in those photos.
You just send locations out to people, yeah.
You're sending the locations out to people. Now, I know my DSLR even has GPS, so it tags the photos there. So just something to keep in mind, when you're anxious to share, hey, look at this great spot I found, and look at all these rubs, and be careful what you're doing. You may end up, letting the cat out of the bag, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. I've been in a couple instances where I've heard people tweak out about that too. It's like, what do you got your location on for, moron? Yeah. Don't post that. Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's like giving away your best fishing hole.
Exactly like that. Well, Nick, we've been, I think we kind of been rattling this one around for a while. I think it's getting kind of late here, and I've got a early morning, so I think we're going to kind of wrap this one up. I do want to close with one parting thought, though, and that's, we've spent the last two episodes talking about public land, and we've snuck in some discussions around stewardship and taking care of your public land, but we also need to think about protecting our public land for future generations, and that's one thing that Backcountry Hunters and Anglers is devoted to. I know you're a member. I'm, I think, 3 payments now away from being a life member. I decided to do that several months ago. But great organization. They stay on top of threats to our public lands, our public streams. Would highly recommend anyone that takes advantage of public lands, whether it's camping, fishing, hunting, hiking, doesn't matter. If you enjoy the use of public lands, highly recommend you check them out. You get a quarterly magazine, and they are out there fighting to protect your public access rights to public lands.
Definitely. It's a good magazine, too. I've actually thought about sending stuff in there. I think I will at some point. But
I keep saying I do, and there's and I'm sure I will too. But the list is getting longer and longer, and I'm finding I'm working myself into positions where I have less and less time to write.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I hear you. And there's a lot of publication to send stuff to, that's for sure. But it is a really cool magazine, and it's if you're not just a hunter, there's a lot of other stuff in there. It's not like it's just focused on that. It's in fact, there's every single issue is really diverse, and there's a lot of great photographers. It's well edited. You should definitely check it out if you're interested in hunt on public land. So,
absolutely,
or do anything on public.
Well, Nick, as always, thank you so much for participating with me. Look forward to the next opportunity that we get to get together and do one of these. And until then, take care, and I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, catch you later, Steve.
That brings us to the end of episode number 3. I would like to thank everyone for listening to the podcast, and if you are listening to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or other outlet, please be sure to subscribe, and we would be grateful if you could take the time to leave us a review. Also, a quick follow-up reminder to be sure to check out Backcountry Hunters and Anglers over on their website at backcountryhunters.org. And if you're not already a member, please consider joining. Even if you're not a hunter but take advantage of public lands for other activities, always remember that BHA is devoted to keeping public lands in public hands. Until next time, be sure to get out there and enjoy our great outdoors. And if you can, take a kid along. Be safe, be responsible, and be sure to set a good example for your fellow outdoors men and women. So long, everyone.